This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, Matt and Rose.
Hey, Kathy.
Hey, Kathy.
Now, you two know how much I love me some art history.
Mm-hmm.
And I love working with the art museums here at Harvard, and I just can't get enough, right? So, have you heard of this podcast from the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Immaterial, 5,000 Years of Art, One Material at a Time?
Yes, it's fantastic.
Ooh,
love it.
Really? Okay, well, I'm telling you nothing you don't know already. But everyone listening, please, this podcast examines the materials of art and what they can reveal about both history and humanity. Each episode, you're going to take a deep dive into different materials like stone, blankets, quilts, clay, and even concrete. What did you guys pick up on?
Yeah, there's like linen, all kinds of stuff, clay, anything. It just takes me back to that museum. It's amazing.
Right. It's like really being there. Mm-hmm.
We had to listen to one of the ones that wasn't clay. So we were diving into linen while we were hanging out the other day. And my favorite quote from that was, "No material is neutral." And I just love that. That was so classic because the linen episode, they were talking about Egypt and Giorgio Armani and high fashion and low fashion.
And how it like wears on the person and like how it flows. It's such a good episode.
Loved it.
Yeah, I'm hoping personally that listening to this is going to class us up a little bit.
We could use it.
Maybe.
But I mean, truly, it is like pulling the curtain back on great works of art and getting a whole new perspective from, conservators and curators, scientists, scholars, and artists.
It's a great listen. As a huge podcast fan, which brought us to making this show, it is a top-notch podcast. I recommend it for everybody.
So if you'd like to hear episodes, search for Immaterial in your favorite podcast app. That's Immaterial, 5,000 Years of Art, one material at a time.
Now go listen.
Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Well, welcome to season 4, Matt and Rose.
Hey!
Oh my goodness, season 4?
How did we survive this long?
Can you believe it? This is wild. Totally wild, but I'm so happy to see you two.
It's great to see you too. They said we'd never make it. They said us young kids with a dream.
We pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and made it work.
Split up fighting over who gets what house plant. Yet here we are, strong as ever.
What?
We're divorced. The show falls apart.
Oh,
All
wow.
of us fall
House
apart.
plants are the biggest thing of something like that. Okay.
Yeah,
all right,
I've had that jade plant for 10 years. You can't have it.
Listen, maybe in a post-pandemic world they are. I don't know. The cats and the house plants. My goodness. Wow. Well, I thought we would, start this brand new season and talk about a new aspect of the program and ask you all a little bit about it. And we are lucky today because we've got our producer Ben with us. Producer Ben.
Hey.
He needs his own theme song, definitely. Put that on your list, Ben.
Yeah, it'll be really annoying banjo music.
But Ben,
Love
really
it.
work on giving yourself the credit. We give that to you.
Okay, good. I'm going to take all the credit for the success of the show.
Yes.
Might as well. Seems
It's
fair.
really true.
I mean, who's listening to us? I don't know.
But the reality
Oh
of the
my
show is, although, Rose, Kathy, and I, we get, all of the accolades and attention, it's a 4-person operation. And Ben has been there all along from the start. And he really is the one that makes the show happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the new segment, which is, in big part inspired by all the work that Ben Carter has done with his own podcast, Tales of the Red Clay Rambler, of course. Mm-hmm. And Matt and Rose, do you want to talk about what we're doing here?
Absolutely.
As you know, we kind of, Matt and I, have our own little world. So we're expanding that world and talking to working artists and the things that they're struggling with in their studios and how can we help them?
Yeah. And more importantly, how have they screwed up?
Yes, because we've all screwed up before.
We have all screwed up. And me more than anybody. But we're really out there.
Say that. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're launching a new segment. So as y'all know, this show has historically been bi-weekly, that we're coming out every other week with our question and answer. But we're gonna try a new segment here, and it's gonna come out every other week. So in between those Q&A sessions, and we're calling this one Fluxed Up. And in Fluxed Up, we are going to interview working artists and talk to them about all the things that have gone wrong in their studio and why they're currently suffering.
Because this isn't something you typically would bring up, Ben, in your podcast, right? Like,
he's really nice to them. We're going to pick it out.
Yeah, we're going to start with their worst mistakes on Fluxed Up and just build from there.
Yes.
But it's
Ben's
true.
all about bringing artists up and elevating their craft and skill. We're about bringing them down to art, humanizing them.
Mm-hmm. So we are very excited. We hope to bring everybody a cavalcade of stars on this segment, and please, try and listen in as I don't know, an added layer to this experience.
Or if you just can't get enough giggles.
Yeah, right. Well, what else has been going on with you two?
Oh, summer.
Yeah, summer.
Really? Other people say summer.
Oh, no, it's summer. Oh,
yeah, y'all have kids.
Yeah, exactly right. Think back when you were a child and how much you enjoyed summer vacation, and then remember all of the things your parents had to do to make that summer vacation happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, my generation, it was just like you were sent out the front door at 9 a.m. and not expected to come back in until 5. Like, what is it? My Gen X was raised on hose water and neglect. Heard that somewhere.
There's certainly some of that, but you gotta keep them with a busy schedule. You gotta keep them occupied at all time, or they'll get up to no good. So with both of our kids, it's definitely been a summer. They're at that perfect age where the freedom isn't quite in their grasp, and so the responsibility still falls on us. But it was a good summer with them, so no complaints. Just a lot of what are we doing today?
Yep, we just finished our summer up at the Harvard Ceramics program. We have like a little break, and then we'll get started again September 3rd when all the students come back and all the U-Hauls are shoved under bridges in Boston, that's a thing, y'all.
Right. It's like
our listeners from around the world. Yeah, Boston is a very old city. We have very low bridges, and we have a lot of parents from out of town bringing their students into the city, and they don't read the signs, and it is inevitable that these U-Haul trucks will be shoved under bridges for about a week. It's crazy. It's crazy. Anywho, well, let's lift our spirits, y'all, with a couple of questions, because we've got some good ones. Let's see. Our first one is from Nicole from Middletown, Connecticut. And Nicole has a question about glazes shivering off of bisqueware.
I had one job.
I know. I was waiting.
The pressure
I was
being
giving
on Mike
you
is
a
real,
second.
Ben.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nicole. I'm from Middletown, Connecticut, and I had some questions about shivering and crazing. I work at a paint your own pottery studio, and we fired cone '06, and we buy all of our bisque pieces from a couple different manufacturers. We use all the same glazes for everything, and specifically the paint glazes that we use, they can be used from cone '06 to cone 6. In the past year, we've seen a drastic increase in the number of pieces that have been shivering from all of our manufacturers. One manufacturer specifically has told us that it could be due to thick glaze, oil, lotion, or hand sanitizer getting on the pottery, not letting the kiln cool down enough to room temperature before we open it. We also recently started doing a fast firing cycle similar to the one mentioned in the previous episode, since all of our pieces are slip cast and fairly uniform. I know that low fire clay and glazes can be a little bit more finicky than other types of like high fire things, but can that stuff or like the different firing process really cause shivering and crazing or even like exacerbate it? And if it is exacerbating it, wouldn't the crazing or shivering just happen later down the line anyways? What the manufacturer has told us doesn't really line up with what I've learned from the CMW workshops that I've taken, so I was just hoping for a little bit more information on this. And could this all be due to the recent changes in material sourcing? And if it is there a certain material that is more likely contributing to all of these issues? Thank you.
Oh, the pain. The pain of it all. I mean, this goes under the category of what the hell, ceramics? Like, how did it get harder? It was so hard.
Get your act together.
I know. And now, I mean, it's so much harder, and there's so many more mysteries.
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, shout out to our paint your own people. They do not get enough credit in ceramics. You know, so many people have they're looking down their nose on certain things, but I shout out to the paint your own, and shout out to the China painters out there, the doll painters, all those people that do the less loved parts of ceramics. But yeah, the suffering is real. It's no doubt about it. And low fire is definitely a thing. You know, I mean, we don't talk about low fire all that much, because, you know, if you're making functional work, you really shouldn't be doing low fire. I know. There's plenty of people that are doing it. I know. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but, you know, vitrification is
that's
real.
too late.
I know. I'm getting dirty looks from Ben. You got to vitrify as much as possible. And Ben does do a good job at that. I'll give him. But yeah, that a lot of the clay bodies that are out there that are sold for low temperature and for slip casting, especially, they're not particularly well fluxed. And so you do end up with some problems. There's a whole raft of problems that Nicole mentioned there. Geez, what were they? There was shivering and
crazing.
Yeah, crazing. Delayed. She was mentioning delayed.
Yeah.
Delayed.
I hate that stuff.
The delayed, we can talk, actually, we'll talk about that one first. You know, delayed crazing is definitely a thing. Crazing, you know, can happen at any time during the lifespan of ceramics. You know, we often associate it with its things coming right out of the kiln, and when you open your kiln, it goes ping, 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 you know, and everybody like grabs their chest and has a heart attack and then slams the lid shut. That is crazing taking place. It's cracking, and that's what you're hearing. And that's what crazing is. It's microscopic, or not even microscopic. You can see a lot of it, cracking taking place. But the catch is that it can take place over time. And the thing that will really exacerbate it taking place over time is the lack of vitrification in the clay body. Because clay, if it's not vitrified, will absorb water, even atmospheric water. But like if you wash it, it's going to absorb water through any exposed clay. And, you know, it gets hot just from the atmosphere being hot or cold, or putting it in the microwave, or pouring hot tea into it. And but I heard that one.
Sorry.
Wow.
That's all right. That's you.
Kathy's
living
got
in the
an emergency.
The emergency is you to get to the point. Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing, Kathy.
Oh, man.
Come
Trying to
on.
be informative here. All right.
Long-winded
Somebody
here.
call
Come
the
on.
ambulance. Kathy just sent me to the hospital. All right. Anyway, but so yeah, things will expand and contract when you heat and cool them. And if they have water in them, it causes that to happen even more. So delayed is definitely a thing, especially when under vitrified. That's going to be a bigger problem. The more interesting one that Nicole mentioned was the shivering. Shivering is a big deal. And this is one where, having Ben here, Ben, I go to you. You do work in lower fire. And do you ever get shivering? Have you experienced shivering? Have you suffered from shivering?
Oh yeah. Well, when teaching workshops, we tried to do a bunch of white earthenware and
Mm.
it shivered.
Yeah.
All the glazes shivered, and it's because of the or lack of vitrification.
Mhm.
Because I mean, to say it's not vitrified is generous. Like the absorption on some of those is like 20% or
Yes,
something
easy
crazy.
20%. Yep.
And that's what I would think would be what would also shiver.
Yeah. Well, the absorption in and of itself is not what's causing the shivering. Okay. So for those of you who don't know what shivering is, okay. So everybody knows crazing, right? It's the crackle that you see in a glaze. And crazing is caused because of thermal expansion, right? Thermal expansion is the fact that all materials expand and contract when you heat and cool them, and everything does it. Plastic does it, concrete does it, metal does it, everything does it, but ceramics do it. And the problem that we have in ceramics is that your clay body has a thermal expansion and your glaze has a thermal expansion. But how much those two materials expand is going to be different because it depends on the composition of that material. So when the clay body expands at a different rate than the glaze, historically, that's when you get crazing. And what happens is that the glaze expands, or actually contraction is the more relevant concept with that. The glaze is contracting more than the clay body, and so that puts it under stress. And I always describe that as putting on a t-shirt that's too small. It's going to crack to relieve the stress of putting on the t-shirt that's too small. Shivering is the opposite of crazing. Okay. Shivering is when the clay body contracts more than the glaze. And now all of a sudden that stress of the t-shirt is that instead of cracking, it literally like just through the neck hole of the shirt. It just does not fit at all. And so it just falls right off. And shivering is literally, you'll get chunks of glaze that'll seem to just pop off the clay body, and they'll have like little bits of clay stuck to them. And that is the clay body crazing, essentially, right? It's cracking to relieve the stress, but it cracks and then the glaze chunks fall off. And so, yeah, it's super common in low fire bodies. Now, the absorption
and you
rate
usually see it on the rims or edges of pots or
thick
pieces.
areas. You know, one of the
Yeah.
classic ones we'll see is that you've got a pot where, like, you know, there's sort of like a trimmed edge in the middle of a belly of a pot, and the glaze builds up thick right there, and they'll just pop right off on those edges.
Yep.
And did she mention, are we assuming she's using a commercial clear because this is a paint your own pottery business? I mean, maybe
Great
we shouldn't
question.
assume that. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
that is a
somebody's
good question.
more cost saving to mix their own.
The good news question mark is that it doesn't really matter. Any glaze can do it, whether it's made commercially or not. It's just going to have that stress. Every single glaze will have a thermal expansion value. But the real problem is going back to sort of Ben's thought about the low fire and why it does it. So being under vitrified is a problem. When clays are under vitrified, they are weaker, substantially weaker. And I don't want to hear the terracotta people telling me about Pete Pinnell's crush study. That's a different subject, everybody.
Back off.
I was about to bring it up.
Oh, of course you were. The low fire people always bring it up. Different study, different concept altogether. But with the absorption rate of the clay body, since it's not vitrified, it can't stand up to the stress of the difference between the thermal expansion of the glaze and the clay body. And so they're just more likely to break just because the clay is not as tough as it was vitrified. You don't see as much shivering on high fire work. It definitely can happen, but it's less common. Not that the difference in thermal expansion doesn't happen, but because the clay body is tougher, it can just withstand that stress a little bit better. But you definitely can get shivering in high fire glazes and clay bodies. That's not the problem.
I mean, it seems like, paint your own pottery is a pretty big business. I
Mhm.
can't,
It
with all the
is.
trouble with low fire white earthenware now, I mean, I can't imagine that they can stick with it. It seems like the whole clay choice might have to shift, but maybe I'm being
Well, they
overly
got to go to
dramatic.
cone 6, right? I mean, wouldn't a cone 6 white body just be easier to deal with?
I would
No,
think
I've
so.
seen lots of shivering in code 6 too.
It definitely can happen. I mean that it's more of the value in what the paint your own places are really doing and what they're trying to offer their customers. Cone 6 is more treacherous. Cone 6 pots are more likely to crack and fail just from the conversion to vitrification. That's stressful on a clay body. I always call vitrification the puberty of clay bodies. Things go through it. You're the same thing, but you're kind of not afterwards, and it's really stressful.
And you're growing and you're all
Yeah.
weird.
And when your business is making sure that like little Bobby makes a Christmas ornament, like you can almost guarantee that it'll survive, except if you get some shivering by firing it at low fire, and all the underglazes will be bright, and the glossy glazes relatively work. So that's more of like a business decision on their part, and sort of quality control in it. Got to get more expensive kilns and this and that. The bigger problem, though, is not just the paint your own. This is a problem for everybody. It's just the paint your own and the low fire potters are still going through a big problem. We've got our regular segment about all of our dead materials, and we've talked about this one in the past, but we're going through a huge change right now in that the US lost its source of talc a couple of years ago. This has happened now twice in the time I've been in ceramics. About 15 years ago, we lost the source of the best talc we had possible, called talc.
Yeah.
And then the last year before, we lost this other form of talc that everybody had moved over to, and we lost talc, and it had a bunch of names. Some people call it Pioneer talc or Texas talc or Am talc. They were all the same thing. The problem with this was the big green egg. So
Yeah.
those of you who don't
The
know
barbecue?
this, yep, the
Uh-huh.
barbecue.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Actually, yeah. So those of you who don't know, go and Google the big green egg, because it is, as Kathy says, it's a barbecue. It's a barbecue smoker. And the big green egg is a ceramic product. It's a green glaze on a ceramic product. And that ceramic is called cordierite. Okay. It's not clay based the way we all think of it, but it's a material cordierite. And everyone listening to the show has a relationship with cordierite. You just don't know it because most kiln shelves that are tan are made out of cordierite. That's what it is. But cordierite is very, very resistant to thermal expansion. Talc, which is in it, really resists thermal expansion. And cordierite's about 90% talc. Well, the big green egg is resistant to thermal expansion, and it's porous, which is actually really good for these smokers because they'll actually hold smoke residue in the walls of the big green egg because the insides aren't glazed and the outsides are glazed. That's the green color. But the big green egg is 90% talc. So the big green egg is such a huge hit that they literally bought the Texas talc mine
Oh, wow.
because they could not get enough talc to make enough big green eggs. And actually, Rose is personally connected to this problem.
Really,
Thanks, don't
Rose?
me. Thanks.
What'd you do?
Well, the company I used to work for, they made. So the company I used to work for, I'm not going to name names, but they had multiple factories, and these multiple factories made different things. And they had factories that made parts for other factories. So we had a factory that used cordierite setters to put tile in and put through our kiln. And the factory that was making those cordierite setters for us couldn't keep up because they were associated with the big green egg, and they were using their cordierite for everything else but the setters that we needed to fire our product, to get our product at the kiln. So yeah, it was always a struggle to get what we needed to run our factory from this factory who's making cordierite. So
Yeah.
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, little maybe interesting aside, years ago, there was an engineering course at Harvard where they were sponsored by a company I will not name, and the students were tasked to create a better barbecue smoker than the green egg. And
Oh.
so I didn't know the course was happening until about 3 weeks before it was done. And the students like come on over and they're like, "Hey, can you help us make this thing?" And I was like, when's it due? They're like 3 weeks. And I'm like, oh man. So I ended up showing them how to coil build. And we coil built using our very pretty robust sculpture body in the studio. We had a smoker off, and it was more about them designing a better system of airflow, etc. But you know, they said they won, so I don't know when that's coming into production. I haven't received any royalties yet, so we'll.
And they're going to start buying stoneware from you.
Yep. Patty brand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bringing it back to Nicole's question, though, now that we've barbecued out
Oh
for a
yeah,
little bit.
Nicole. Yeah.
Was there a question?
Because there is no fix, though, right? I mean, isn't the people doing paint your own pottery after the fact, what can you really change beyond making like a miracle glaze that has a crazy wide amount of expansion?
And that's the problem. So the circle around on the big green egg is that when the Pioneer talc left the marketplace, because it's all going to make the big green egg, all of the clay bodies that were using talc, and that's really the low temperature clay bodies, lost their source of high quality talc. And the one benefit of talc, which is a magnesium source, is that it's got really low thermal expansion. So it doesn't expand very much when you heat and cool it, which is really beneficial for the big green egg because you're getting the barbecue hot and you don't want it to expand and contract because it'll crack. That's why they use the cordierite. Well, that same principle is used in a lot of low fire bodies where they're adding in magnesium, trying to keep the thermal expansion down. Well, now everybody's had to go and redesign their clay bodies to use different sources of talc. And not to be a bummer, but pretty much all the ones I've seen or people that have reported to us that they've used in manufacturing, they're not good. They're really low quality talcs. And I think that the clay companies really have not made adequate substitutions with what they're doing. And so that thermal expansion is what it is. And unless the clay companies are going to do something to figure out how to fix the thermal expansion of their clays and the casting slip here that we're using, it's going to continue to be a problem. The one solution would be, Ben, as you're sort of going, is you don't necessarily need a glaze that does everything, but you need a glaze that matches the thermal expansion of the clay body they're working with. So if there is any solution for Nicole, it's probably to go and to try other glazes and try to match their thermal expansion. Now, the problem is you're never going to know what it is because thermal expansion for glazes is a thing, but there's no relevant numerical value. Like actually clay bodies, you'll often buy them and they'll give you a thermal expansion number.
Do they?
Some
No.
do, not all of them.
Okay.
But with glazes, there is no relevant thermal expansion number. We have the thermal expansion, but it's essentially impossible to measure it. I will say to the people out there who are about to butt me, yes, glaze calculators out there will give you a thermal expansion number. That number is complete and utter nonsense. Okay, it is completely made up fantasy. My mentor, Dr. Carty, had a graduate student who did her entire thesis on that this number cannot be calculated. It has to be measured. Those calculations are, theoretical. Just the same way we can all theorize world peace. It doesn't actually work that way, everybody. And so you have to measure it.
These.
And
They're pretty good.
I like them world. But that you have to measure it. So really the short answer for Nicole is try some other glazes and hopefully they'll hold together. And hopefully it's just the glazes because it could be the under glazes too. Although under glazes tend to be a little bit more stable.
let's one thing at a time. Poor Nicole.
I
Poor
really
Nicole.
wanted to start the season on a bummer.
I know, right? That just plummeted. Boy. Okay, well, Nicole, I'm so glad we finally got to a suggestion for you. And so thank you for your patience.
3 hours later.
Well, it is a big subject. I'm sure this won't be the only time we talk about low fire earthenware this season. But let's go on to our next question. And this comes in from Rebecca from Seattle, Washington. And Rebecca has a question about my least favorite thing, bloating.
Hello, For Flux Sake. I run a community studio in Seattle, Washington, and I've had a few issues with a few pieces in the over the last month. Different clay bodies bloating during the firing. So it's not the same clay body. It's not the same glazes that folks are using when they bloat. We fired a cone 6. We haven't changed anything about our firings, and it seems to be somewhat random. So I'd say about 4 pieces over the last month have had this same issue when we're firing, hundreds throughout the month. And I can't quite pinpoint, as it seems pretty random, of when it happens or why it happens. I'm wondering what we can attribute bloating to other than overfiring, if there's anything else that causes it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is a good question because in our studio, we have a cone 6 body and then we have terracotta, right? And the two look almost exactly alike.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started getting, bloating all of a sudden for this cone 6 clay body that we've used for years. And now there's like a side-eye war. So now the cone 6 people are side-eyeing the terracotta people because they're convinced that terracotta got into the reclaim, and then other way around. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I've got my money on, well, no, I'm not going to say. I won't say.
So someday Kathy's going to be sitting on her porch in a rocking chair telling all the young folk about the side-eye wars of 24.
That's right. That's right.
Hey Ben, you're in charge of running the show. Have you kept any statistics on our audience developing substance abuse problems after getting depressed listening to our show?
What?
It's about 98%.
98%. Yeah.
Woo, we got another 2%. Let's go.
We can do it.
This is going to be another bummer here. Rebecca, I hate to tell you this. The murderer was in the house the whole time.
Oh,
Everything is bloating all the time.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
The problem with bloating is, it's like they say about pests in your house. You see one mouse and it really means you've got 100 mice in your house. You just saw the one. And when you see a couple of pots bloat, all the pots are bloating and you're just getting it a little bit worse in a couple of them. So what is bloat? Bloat is when a clay body begins to expand again after theoretically it is finished its vitrification. The problem is that most people view bloat when they hear that, they sort of think of it, like a blister, like a skin condition, and you're seeing all these bubbles. That's like end stage bloat. That's like when that's terminal at that point, right? That's
stage 5.
stage 5 bloat. You're already dead. And it's a bit of a problem. But the thing about it is that when you actually look at bloat, it was happening the entire time. And it just, when you see it, it's gotten to the point where it's so incredibly bad. So bloat is a really funny condition. And I've got a visual aid. We'll put this up on the show blog for this episode. So you can look at this because you're really going to need to look around at this chart to understand what I'm actually talking about. But you can see all this in our commercial clay profiling, where we've been working on profiling what is going on in clay bodies at different temperatures. So the particular picture I'm going to share is of a porcelain. I won't name it on the show, but from a specific manufacturer. But it's not them. Lots of clays do this. But what we see here in this graph is our vitrification curve. And we're looking at the orange line here, the density line. And what happens is density starts very low. That's like when you're bisquing. And then it goes up. The clay gets more dense as you vitrify. And so you start with a curve that starts low and then it climbs. And then you get sort of a mountaintop, sort of a rounded mountaintop. And we call that our plateau. And that's when the clay is fully vitrified. Well, if you keep firing past that plateau, the density begins to go down again. Okay. And the density going down is bloat happening. The clay is becoming less dense when you fire it hotter. And the catch about the clay that we'll post is that I'm showing you a porcelain. Most people think that bloating has to be a dark clay like Kathy's talking about.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Every single clay can bloat if you overfire it.
Equal opportunity bloating.
Equal
Great.
opportunity.
Yes.
And the dark clays do it more, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. But what's going on when the density is going down is that your clay body, even when it's vitrified, is full of tiny little pores. Okay. They're not connected anymore. That's part of the vitrification process, but the pores are still there. And when you overfire your clay, it becomes too soft and those pores can swell and expand. You know, that concept of hot air rising. This trapped air begins to expand. And because the clay is overfired, it begins to swell. And that makes everything go. It's crazy when you look at this in the shrinkage data for clays like this, because it looks like it's unshrinking. Right, that the clay is shrinking less. But what's actually happened is that it shrank completely and then it's bloating, so it's getting bigger again. But for the first like 4 to 5 cones worth of bloat, you cannot see it with the naked eye. That's why I was saying when you actually see it, it's already dead. You already went through all the small stage swelling and stuff, and now it's just gone crazy and it's gone really badly. And so it's a huge problem for overfiring, and all clays will do it. Dark clays tend to be worse, and dark clays fired at cone 6 tend to be worse because dark clays contain iron. And iron, specifically red iron oxide, has a huge problem that at about cone 4, red iron oxide decomposes. It does what we call thermal decomposition, where by just hitting that temperature, you don't need a reduction firing or anything. By just firing red iron oxide to cone 4, it will start to release some of its oxygen. And that's happening when that clay body is melting. So that's why dark clay bodies are known for bloating, because it happens at cone 4. And if that body's only fired at cone 6, it's well on the way of almost being done firing. And so it bloats even more dramatically because it's releasing even more oxygen. But porcelains will do it too. It's just that the dark clays will do it. And then the real bummer, you know, I know everybody's got their magic special firing for dark clay bodies, and they do not make a difference. The clay is going to bloat. It is a physical chemical property of iron. I know, this is why our depression sweeps throughout our audience, but this is why I get so down on dark clay bodies. And you'll note a lot of dark clay bodies say specifically fire them to cone 5 and not cone 6. That's because they're hoping for you to fire it hotter to get it to vitrify, but not so far past that cone 4 where they know things are going to go really bad. So the only solution is don't fire past cone 4, but that means you've got to adjust your glazes and your this and your that and your other things. But it's going to happen. It's just when you see it, it's just when it got so bad, it's going to be a problem. So Rebecca, step back from the sledgehammer. Don't smash your kiln. Don't go rage on the studio. It's just, yeah, go ahead.
Right. And I mean, like ours, it doesn't happen all the time. You know, it happens occasionally, you know, in the same way that I may get a crack in the foot that I've adhered to the bottom of a hand-built plate occasionally. So, I mean, I guess everybody just has to weigh, you know, see what's going on and then weigh out. Is this worth continuing to, you know, am I going to lose my mind? Like if I carved a piece for, you know, 3 hours and then I found bloating, yes, I would lose my mind just a little bit. But so, I mean, I guess Yeah. Mhm.
That's a real concern. Back when I was a student, I was doing work. I was probably copying you, Kathy, because you're such a trailblazer. But I was doing a
Totally.
ton of graffito work and sculpture and additive sculpture. And I was doing it all at Cone 10 at the time because I'd been working in pots and I started to experiment with design and graphics and all that. And I kept losing all of this work at Cone 10. And that's when I finally rage flip the table and forget it. I'm going to Cone 04 because at least then I didn't have to worry about the bloating. And that's why a lot of sculpture stuff is at lower temperature, because the stress of vitrification or bloating problems or any of those types of things, they're just less than. But yeah, when you're in a studio and you're making pots and you need it to be stable and you need it to be vitrified, you're going to fire to at least mid temperature. But for Rebecca, what I'd say is fire as cold as you can get away with. Really seriously consider Cone 5. You're going to need to look at your absorption rates of that clay at Cone 5. You're going to need to see if your glazes are really melting. But the cooler you can fire it, the better off you're going to be with that problem.
Good luck.
Goodness gracious. All right, y'all. We were extremely overzealous in our chatting around these questions. So that is all the time we have for today. But we have lots more questions to get to in future episodes. So until then, Matt and Rose and Ben, I'll see you then.
See you later, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week. And if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time. And when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system.